The dead goat lay stiff against the barn wall, her eyes wide open, frozen in the last moment of panic. Eli Brennan crouched beside her, one gloved hand on her side. She was barely 2 years old, strong pregnant. Or she had been. Now she was just another casualty of a winter that hadn't even officially started. The wind outside screamed against the wooden siding like it was trying to rip the boards from the frame. The kind of wind that didn't just move through you, it ate at you. Eli rose slowly, his joints stiff from the cold and age, and wiped a gloved hand across his beard. The storm had moved in fast. No warning, no pattern, just a sudden drop like the sky had been holding its breath and then exhaled death. He stepped out of the barn and into white. Snow whipped sideways in sheets, slicing visibility to feet. The path from barn to cabin was already buried, and the sun had vanished hours ago, though it was barely past 4. Eli leaned into the wind one step at a time, boots crunching over a crust of ice. When he reached the porch, he stopped and stared out into the storm like it might blink first. June was already at the door, holding it open, wrapped in that oversized gray sweater she wore like armor. She didn't say anything. She just looked at him with that quiet, sturdy kind of concern that didn't ask stupid questions, like was she still alive or did you try everything? Eli stepped inside, peeled off his outer layers in silence, and dropped them by the fire. The cabin was dim and warm, lit only by the wood stove and the low yellow cast of a hurricane lantern on the table. He poured himself coffee without asking, and sat. June finally spoke. "That's the third in 2 weeks." He nodded. "Third this early." Outside, the wind clawed again. June poured her own coffee, sat down across from him. "This isn't like last year." Eli took a long sip. "This isn't like any year." He stood and crossed to the window, wiping a circle into the frost-covered glass with the side of his hand. Beyond the thick pane, the yard was just wind and white. No horizon, no fence line, no sound but what came from the storm. Then from the side barn, the small drafty one, they both heard it. A faint, high-pitched bleat. One of the kids. Eli was out the door before June could stop him. The wind hit harder this time. He trudged toward the barn, shoulders hunched, scarf frozen to his face. The smaller structure wasn't meant to hold animals in this kind of cold, but he'd run out of space in the main barn weeks ago. 6 kids, newborns, barely standing, huddled in a corner under hay and blankets and a heat lamp that couldn't outpace the wind. Inside, the air bit at his skin. The lamp flickered. One kid was trembling, legs stiff. Another had ice forming on its ears. This was wrong. This wasn't just cold, it was something else. Something older. He'd lived on this land 31 winters. He'd seen 40 black ice whiteout blizzards, trees split by pressure. But never this early. Never with this kind of intent. Eli bent, felt under the blankets. The smallest kid, a little white and brown doe, barely breathed. He picked her up. His hands shook. He couldn't bury another one. Not this week. Back in the house, June wrapped the kid in towels warmed by the stove. She didn't speak for a long while. Finally, as she fed the little doe warm goat's milk from a dropper, she asked, "You think we're going to lose them all?" Eli didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the corner where a stack of receipts and mail sat beneath a busted flashlight and a coil of baling twine. He pulled a feed invoice from the pile, turned it over, and stared at the blank back. Then he reached for a pencil. "What are you doing?" June asked. "Drawing something stupid," he muttered. It wasn't really stupid. Not to him. It was something he'd thought about a few winters back after reading a random paragraph in an old agricultural journal. about how hay could trap heat better than wood if compressed right, about how body heat could build in enclosed spaces faster than people thought if you made the space small enough, tight enough, thick enough. He started sketching a dome made of hay bales, 3 bales thick, low entrance, rounded top, something more like a womb than a shelter. No fire, no electricity, just 6 baby goats and their own warmth. You think hay's going to save them? June asked, standing beside him now. I think the barn's going to kill them, Eli said. And I think I've got a better shot with hay and math than with hope and wind. June looked at the drawing for a long moment. Then she leaned in and kissed his temple. Then draw faster. The next morning, Eli drove the snow-covered path to the lower field where he'd stacked last season's hay. He loaded the trailer with the first round 22 bales and hauled them to the yard. By noon, he'd begun laying the first ring. That's when Noah Kittredge pulled up on a battered snowmobile, his cheeks pink from the cold scarf trailing. You building a round pen? He asked, lifting his goggles. Eli didn't look up. Building something that might save 6 lives. Noah squinted. Out of hay. Eli kept working. Something's wrong with the cold this year, he said. It's not just coming. It's already here. Noah didn't laugh, didn't mock, just nodded quietly like someone who'd felt the same thing in his bones. As Noah left, Eli turned to look at the half-formed circle in front of him. The snow was falling again. The wind was rising. He reached for another bale. The wind had calmed just enough for the laughter to carry. Eli Brennan stood ankle-deep in snow hay stuck to his gloves, breath clouding the air as he adjusted the angle of a bale in the forming dome. The circle was halfway built now, the outer ring, solid tight, stacked 3 bales high. He moved slowly, methodically, measure, lift place. Each bale was over 70 pounds stiff with cold. But his rhythm never broke, until the engine noise echoed up the valley. A rusted green pickup rolled into view, tires crunching on frozen gravel. Jonas Becker. Of course. Jonas killed the engine right at the edge of the property line, stepped out without bothering to close the door. He wore his usual smirk, the kind of expression that made Eli think of a man who'd never built anything, with his hands only knocked down what others did. What in the hell are you doing? Brennan, Jonas called, gloves shoved in his coat pockets. You building a goat sauna? Eli didn't look up. Jonas walked closer, boots dragging in the snow. I drove by yesterday, figured you were just rearranging feed. But this, he motioned to the rising circle. This is new even for you. It's shelter, Eli said, voice flat. For the kids. Jonas let out a sharp bark of laughter. Out of hay, you serious? He turned, yelling toward his open truck. Hey, you gotta see this, 2 other men stepped out. Eli recognized them, ranchers from the next township, big operations with steel barns and deep pockets. They said nothing, just stood with arms crossed, watching. Jonas took a few steps closer, eyes scanning the layout. Let me guess, you stack your hay high enough and it'll start thinking warm thoughts. He nudged a bale with his boot. You know this is basically kindling, right? 1 spark and poof, there go your goats. No fire, Eli said. Just body heat. Jonas blinked, stunned for a beat, then turned howling with laughter toward the other men. He says body heat, like those little shivering things are gonna cuddle up and breathe their way through a blizzard. Eli tightened the strap on his glove and kept stacking. You've lost it, Jonas muttered, shaking his head. You used to be halfway sharp. Now look at you playing architect with straw. Eli finally turned. He didn't raise his voice, didn't meet the mockery with pride or anger. Let 'em laugh, he said, mostly to himself, but loud enough. The cold won't." The words hung there suspended between breath and snow. Jonas stared at him for a long second, then scoffed and turned back toward the truck. "Don't come begging when you need to replace your stock." "I won't," Eli said. And then just like that, they were gone, tires spinning on ice, laughter trailing behind them like smoke. Eli was alone again. He worked until dark. By then, the dome was shoulder high, the circle closing in toward a top that would peak at about 8 feet. The interior was wide enough for him to move between the goats, for them to lay curled without crowding. He lined the base with dry straw, thick and soft. At the house, June handed him a bowl of stew without asking how it went. He ate in silence, then pulled the drawing from the corner of the table and began adjusting the angles again, reinforcing how the final layer would arch. June sat beside him, pouring tea. "You could have told him to shove it." "I did," Eli said, just not in words he'd recognize. She smiled, but her eyes stayed on the sketch. "You still think it's enough?" "I don't think," Eli said. "I know the barn's not." That was the only certainty he had. The next morning, the sky was the color of burnished metal. Eli led the 6 goats, small, unsteady, shivering out of the side barn one by one and toward the dome. They didn't resist. If anything, they followed him as if they somehow knew this was their last shot. He laid each kid gently onto the straw bed inside the structure. Their breath came out in soft white clouds that hung briefly before fading into the hay-scented dark. He moved slowly, careful not to disturb them too much. 2 of them were still too weak to stand without wobbling. One, the little white and brown doe, settled her head onto his boot, as if claiming him for warmth. He knelt there a moment, hand resting on her back. Then he stood, stepped out, and pulled the canvas flap into place. June stood nearby, arms crossed, her coat zipped to her chin. "It's strange," she said. "What is that you had to build something that looks so ridiculous to do something that's always been simple, keeping them alive?" Eli looked at the dome. "It doesn't have to look right. It just has to work." The snow began again that afternoon, soft at first, then urgent. Wind returned by nightfall, sharper than before. Eli stood at the kitchen window with a cup of coffee cooling in his hand, watching as the thermometer dipped past 15, then 22. June wrapped a blanket over his shoulders, wordless. The storm warning crackled over the radio shortly after midnight. Not a regular cold front. A record drop. The kind of drop that cracked pipes, snapped trees. One rancher 40 miles north was already reporting livestock losses. Eli didn't sleep. By dawn, everything outside was white and roaring. The thermometer read 31. Eli pulled on 3 layers, wrapped a scarf over his face until only his eyes were exposed, and opened the door to a wall of wind. Snow slapped his skin, tore at his coat. He took the first step toward the dome and almost slipped. June's voice behind him, "You don't have to go out yet." Eli didn't answer. He gripped the railing and kept moving one step, then another. He didn't know what he'd find when he reached the dome, only that he had to find out. And if they were alive in their warm breathing, then maybe he hadn't lost his mind. Maybe he'd just found something one else had the patience to believe in. The dome was gone. That was Eli Brennan's first thought, as he stumbled through the white-out boots, vanishing beneath knee-high drifts. The spot where the hay dome had stood just yesterday was now a seamless hump of snow buried under what looked like 4 feet of hard-packed ice. The path he'd shoveled last night vanished. The wooden stakes he'd planted to mark the dome's edge gone. Only the vague curve of the top remained, like the shoulder blade of some sleeping beast beneath a blanket of white. He dropped to his knees. His gloves were stiff, crusted in ice, but he didn't stop. He started digging with both hands, tearing through layers of wind-hardened snow fists, slamming into it like it had wronged him personally. His breath came in gasps, scarf-soaked lungs burning. The storm had been worse than expected, colder, heavier, meaner. And now there might be 6 frozen bodies under a brilliant, beautiful failure. The canvas flap was frozen shut, a sheet of ice sealing the entrance tight. He pounded at it, then braced both hands on the hay beside the flap, and yanked until the canvas tore free, with a brutal snap revealing darkness beyond. For a moment, Eli couldn't see, and then he felt it. Warmth. Not a hint of it. Not slightly better than outside warmth. Real warmth. Radiant, thick, alive. He crawled inside. The hay scratched at his coat as he moved forward, a light dim and gold through the packed walls. It smelled of dry grass and animal breath, earthy and clean. And there they were. 6 small bodies curled in straw steam rising gently from their backs, breath visible in soft white pulses. No shivering, no frostbite, just sleep, deep, peaceful, undeserved sleep. The little white and brown doe lifted her head lazily, ears twitching, and blinked at him like she'd been interrupted from a dream. Then she yawned, stretched, and rested her chin back down on another goat's side. Eli froze, just knelt there, eyes wide, lungs not moving. Then he laughed. It came out raw, unsteady, half-choked. He pressed his bare hand to the hay wall. Cool, yes, but not cold. The structure was doing exactly what he'd calculated it would, holding the goat's body heat, like a thermos, trapping it in a tight, layered seal of insulation. No wind, no drafts, no fire, just science luck and something close to a miracle. He ran his hands over each goat one by one. Their bodies were warm, heartbeats strong, fur dry. One of them even let out a disgruntled grunt when he tried to check under its belly like he was disturbing their nap. Eli sat down in the straw and let out the breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "If this doesn't work," he whispered, brushing hay from the little doe's ear, "I bury 6 bodies and my own damn pride." But it had worked. God help him, it had worked. He stayed for nearly an hour. Not because he needed to, because he didn't want to leave. The storm outside still howled, but here was peace. Here was warmth. He could feel it against his face, seeping into his bones. After days of fear and second-guessing, it was like sitting inside a secret that no one else had figured out yet. When he finally crawled out, the cold slammed back into him like a slap. His eyes watered instantly. His hands, even inside gloves, began to ache. He stood up and turned back toward the house, only to see headlights in the driveway. A truck. No Jonas's truck. Eli blinked snow from his lashes. Jonas stood outside, bundled in a heavy parka, snow caked on his shoulders. 2 other men were in the cab behind him, visible through the windshield, silent. Eli walked toward him. Jonas didn't move. "How bad is it?" he called out over the wind. Eli pulled his scarf down so Jonas could see his face. "They're sleeping," he said. Jonas's face twitched. It moved through confusion, then disbelief, then something that looked a lot like fear. "That's not possible." "Go look for yourself," Eli said, nodding toward the dome. Jonas didn't. Not yet. He stood there, fists clenched in his pockets, face pale beneath the frost. Then he looked away. "You're telling me those goats are warm in that? What is that, a hay igloo in this storm?" Eli didn't answer. He just turned, walked past him, and stepped onto the porch. Jonas stood there for a second longer, then turned and trudged back to his truck. The tires spun briefly in the snow before the vehicle reversed down the drive, fishtailing slightly as it disappeared into white. Back inside, June met him with a towel and a mug of broth. She didn't ask. She just placed both in his hands and waited. "They're warm," he said. She nodded, but her shoulders relaxed. "You were right." He didn't smile. "Doesn't feel like winning," he said. "Feels like getting lucky on a loaded coin." June sipped her tea. Sometimes that's all survival is. The storm lasted another 14 hours. They listened to the radio the whole time. Reports poured in from across the region. Livestock losses, collapsed barns, power outages. Some ranchers couldn't even reach their animals, the wind too strong, snow too deep. Jonas's voice crackled through the emergency channel just after noon. "We lost 2 already," he said. "Can't get to the barn. The heat lamps can't keep up." His voice shook, maybe more by now. I need to know if it's working. That hay thing of yours, is it real? Because if it is..." The signal dropped. Eli didn't move. He just sat by the fire staring at the kettle as it hissed. June placed a hand on his. "What are you going to do?" Eli looked toward the window where the dome was buried again under wind and silence. "If they're still alive tomorrow," he said, "I'll help him build one." June nodded. "And if they're not?" Eli took a long breath. "Then I was wrong, and I'll carry that." The next morning the wind eased, not stopped, just softened, enough to walk. Eli pulled on every layer he owned and stepped back into the snow. The sky was gray, heavy, watching. He walked to the dome again, not with fear this time, with something heavier, hope, with weight. And if he was right again, if those kids were still inside IGLOO, then maybe what he'd built wasn't just a ridiculous hay pile. Maybe it was something other people needed too. The dome was warm enough to make Eli sweat through 2 layers of thermals, even with the entrance flap wide open behind him. He knelt in the straw steam rising faintly from the ground and watched the 6 goat kids stir in their sleep. One of them sneezed, then tucked her head under another's belly like a child curling into a blanket. The little white and brown doe, the weakest of the group, when he'd brought them in now, stretched luxuriously and blinked up at him with wide, lazy eyes. He reached out and scratched behind her ear. "I built a womb out of straw and desperation," Eli whispered. "And it worked. It shouldn't have. Not according to the books. Not according to everyone in town. Not according to logic, pride, or common sense. But here, inside this strange, glowing capsule of hay and heat and silence, life had carved out a corner for itself. Outside, Alaska was trying to kill everything it could reach. But not here. He stayed longer than he meant to, listening to their breathing. It was quiet, steady proof. Proof that the old ways weren't always the best ways. That sometimes the thing that looked dumbest was just the thing no one had the courage to try first. When he finally crawled out into the cold again, the light had changed. Snow still fell, but slower now. The wind still howled, but less like a scream and more like a growl. His legs ached from squatting, his back stiff, but the fire in his chest kept him moving. June met him at the door with a fresh towel and coffee. She took one look at his face and said, "Still alive?" "Warm," he nodded. "Too warm, almost." She poured his coffee. "That possible?" He took a long sip. "Not supposed to be. But I think we've got something bigger than supposed to going on here." She smiled and handed him a second cup. That's when the knock came. Sharp, urgent. Eli opened the door to a snow-covered figure hunched in the wind. Jonas Becker. His coat was dusted and white, his beard thick with frost, but it was his eyes that stopped Eli raw, bloodshot, and wide in a way Eli had never seen before. "I need to know what you did," Jonas said. "I need to know how it works." He didn't wait for permission. He just stepped inside, still carrying the cold with him, like it had soaked into his bones. "Lost 2 already," he said. "My last 2 strong ones. Maybe more by now. I can't even get into the barn to check. Wind's too bad. Heat lamps are useless. His voice cracked. He looked at Eli with something stripped bare. "I need to know if it's real." Eli sat across from him, leaned forward. "Body heat," he said. "That's all it is. 6 kids in a sealed space. Haze the wall. Straw bedding underneath. No drafts. Their warmth bounces back. That dome's just a container." Jonas stared at him. "That's it." Eli nodded. Jonas ran a hand over his face, fingers trembling. "I called you a fool. Told everyone. Said it was a waste of hay." "I remember." "I lost 4, Jonas said, voice hollow. "Maybe more. The rest are barely standing. I can't watch them die, Eli. I just can't." Eli stood. "Come see it," he said. They trudged out together, Jonas moving like a man walking toward something sacred. When they opened the flap, and the warmth hit Jonas in the face, he staggered. He knelt in the entrance, looked at the goats, reached out and touched one of them, then pulled his hand back like he'd been burned. "They're warm." Eli said nothing. "They're warm," Jonas repeated. "Like a goddamn wood stove." He crawled back out and sat down hard in the snow, covered his face with both hands. "I was wrong," he said. "So wrong. And they're gonna die for it." Eli didn't offer comfort. There wasn't a sentence in the world that would fix that kind of pain. What he did say was this: "We can build another. Tonight. Right here." Jonas looked up. "I'll show you how." They didn't waste time. By mid-afternoon, they had 40 hay bales stacked in Jonas's trailer. Eli walked him through every detail. 3 bales thick, offset seams, low roof, tight curve. They cleared a patch near Eli's dome, flattening snow with shovels and boot stomps. Jonas worked like a man racing his guilt. Every bale was stacked with military precision. No sarcasm, no jokes, just urgency and quiet questions. By dusk, it was finished. A twin dome, just smaller. Jonas drove back to his place, loaded his 4 remaining kids into crates, and brought them over, too weak to walk, barely making a sound. He carried them into the dome himself, laying them on fresh straw, tucking canvas tight at the entrance. Then he sat in the snow and stared at it like it might disappear. Eli sat beside him, the sky darkening above. "You think they'll make it?" Jonas asked. "If they've got enough heat left to start," Eli said. "If the structure holds, then yeah, they've got a chance." Jonas exhaled hard. "I killed 8 goats," he whispered, "by being too proud, too sure. I called you stupid." "I was scared too," Eli said. "Only difference is I ran out of other ideas first." They sat like that for a long time, watching the domes. 2 lumps in the snow. 2 strange little wombs breathing heat and silence into a world trying to freeze. Jonas finally stood. "Tomorrow," he said, "I'm bringing more hay. I'll build another one. For the ones I've got left. For anyone who wants in." Eli nodded. "You're not the only one losing animals," he said. Jonas looked at him. "Then let's not be the only ones saving them." That night, the wind returned. Not like before, but hard enough to rattle the porch rails. The sky stayed low and gray. Temperatures dropped to 26. The domes disappeared again beneath thick snowfall. Eli didn't sleep much. He checked both domes twice before midnight. The kids were still warm, still breathing. And when he looked down the drive, he saw headlights. 2 more trucks pulling into the yard. Behind the glass, shadowy figures sat still watching the domes. The word was getting out. By sunrise, there were 4 trucks parked in the Brennans' driveway. Engines idled, mufflers puffing out slow streams of white breath into the freezing air. Inside the cabs, men sat with hands clenched on steering wheels, watching the domes like they were altars. Eli stood at the kitchen window, coffee gone cold in his hand, trying to figure out what to feel. He wasn't sure if it was pride. It didn't feel like victory, more like pressure. "They've been there for an hour," June said, tying her hair back with the elastic from the newspaper. "You should go talk to them." Eli didn't move. "They're not here for me. They're here for the hay." She looked at him for a long moment, then picked up his coat and dropped it over his shoulders. "You're the one who built the damn thing. So yeah, they are here for you." Outside, the air was still bitter. His boots crunched through the frost-hardened snow as he walked down the drive. The trucks were all local ranchers. He recognized some he'd argued with at co-op meetings, others he barely knew by name. Vernon Ricks stepped out first. Big guy, usually loud. His voice now was quiet, brittle. "Eli," he said with a nod. "Vernon. I heard..." He glanced past Eli toward the domes. "I heard they're still alive. Your goats. They are." Vernon's jaw worked for a second. "I've lost 5. Heater gave out. Barn roof's got ice coming through the rafters. Winds like it's alive." The others climbed out one by one. Sam Dietrich, Marcus Webb, a younger guy named Dale who'd moved to the area last year. Their faces all told the same story: exhaustion, fear, and something just shy of shame. "We didn't come to ask for hay," Sam said. "We came to ask for the truth." Eli looked at them, then at the domes. "Come see." He led them to the first dome, the original, and pulled back the flap. The warmth rolled out like breath from an oven. Sam stepped back instinctively. Vernon leaned forward, squinting into the dim interior. The goats were awake now, heads lifting noses, twitching eyes bright. Marcus let out a soft whistle. "Holy hell." "Body heat," Eli said. 3 bales thick. No gaps. Straw bedding. The structure holds the warmth." "That's it?" Dale asked. Eli nodded. "That's it." There was silence except for the wind. Sam crouched by the entrance, fingers curled on the edge of the flap. "I don't want to say I told you so," he said, eyes still locked on the goats. "I want them to be alive." Eli didn't say anything. 16, Sam said after a moment. "That's how many I lost. 16 kids, all gone overnight." He didn't cry, but his voice had the weight of someone carrying more than just numbers. Marcus stepped back, rubbing his eyes. "What do we need to do?" "Get bales," Eli said. "You'll need at least 40. More if you want to build for multiples. And you build fast." "Weather's not done. I've got a trailer," Vernon said. "I'll be back in an hour." "I'll help," said Dale. "I've got a bale hook and nothing left to lose." They worked all day. Trucks came and went carrying loads of hay and stacks of tarp. Eli and Jonas moved between build sites, explaining spacing, demonstrating layering, showing how to angle the top bales to create a seal. Some of the men are stiff at first, still too proud to admit they needed help. But as the domes began to rise, clumsy copies at first, then closer replicas, the pride started shifting. It became focus, urgency, desperation turned into action. June made thermoses of coffee, brought out sandwiches. No one asked. No one needed to. By sunset, 5 new domes stood on Eli's land, scattered like huts in a strange, frozen village. Some held 3 kids, others 6. All of them were weak, quiet, too tired to protest the move. Eli helped guide them in, checked their breathing, brushed frost from their noses. Each time the warmth began to build, he felt that same impossible relief, like lighting a fire in the middle of an avalanche. That night, Eli sat by the window again, the wind now a low, endless sigh. Jonas dropped into the chair beside him, his gloves still on straw, stuck in his hood. "I didn't think I'd be here," he said. "No one did. I keep thinking, what if we'd all just built these from the start?" Eli shook his head. "Then you wouldn't believe in them. They'd be just another thing you'd think you knew." Jonas laughed, dry and bitter. "Yeah, guess pain's the only thing that teaches men like us." They sat there in silence until the stove clicked shifting coals. Around midnight, a call came through the emergency radio frequency, a woman's voice trembling, urgent. "This is Carla Linton from down North Ridge," she said. "I've got 9 kids showing signs of frostbite. 1 already gone. We tried tarps and heat lamps. Nothing's working. If anyone has a way, anything, we'll try it." Eli grabbed the mic. "Carla, this is Eli Brennan. I'll show you how to build a dome." A pause. "Is that the hay thing everyone's whispering about?" It's not a whisper anymore. By morning, 2 more families showed up. A man named Harris, another woman, Denise, with her teenage son. All carrying crates, bales, stories of loss. The domes had turned from curiosity to gospel. Jonas walked up to Eli mid-morning, rubbing his neck. "We're not going to have enough space," he said, "if more people keep showing up." Eli looked across the yard. He didn't see domes anymore. He saw lifeboats. "Then we build more." That afternoon, June found him sitting on the porch, notebook in hand drawing. "More designs?" she asked. He nodded. "Smaller versions. Faster builds. Trying to get the materials down to the bare minimum. Most folks can't spare more than a few dozen bales." She sat beside him. "You know what this is becoming, don't you?" Eli looked out across the white, where domes steamed gently in the snow. A beginning. The first out-of-county truck arrived just after dawn. Eli spotted it from the porch, sipping from a cracked thermos, his breath fogging in the brittle air. The rig was bigger than most locals, drove diesel dual rear wheels covered in a thick crust of road salt. Its headlights cut through the haze like search beams. It came to a slow stop at the end of the drive. Then another truck pulled in behind it, and then a third. By the time Eli stood up and stepped down from the porch, there were 5 rigs idling in his yard, engines, humming doors, opening boots, crunching into the snow. The men and women who stepped out weren't strangers to cold. They wore layers of Carhartt and canvas, some with snowshoes strapped to their packs, some with red, wind-burned faces that hadn't seen rest in days. But it was their eyes that gave them away. They were out of time. A tall man with a trimmed gray beard walked forward first, his gait stiff from the drive. "Brennan?" he asked. Eli nodded. The man glanced toward the domes rising from the snow behind the barn. Steam curled faintly from the vents cut near their tops. "I'm Callum Fry," the man said. "Heard about your hay trick. My brother and Homer sent a message through the old VHF channel. Said there's goats alive here." That true Eli didn't answer. He just turned and motioned with one hand. They followed him across the snow, a slow parade of desperation. The dome closest to the house was Vernon's. Inside, 3 kids lay curled in a fresh layer of straw ears, twitching noses, wet eyes, bright. The flap opened, and warm air pushed out against the morning cold like breath. Callum stopped at the entrance, his brows pulling down. "No one believes the haystack until it breathes back," Eli said. Callum knelt, touched the inside wall with bare fingers. "God Almighty," he muttered. "It's real." Behind him, a woman choked out a sound. Eli turned. She was already lowering a crate from the back of her truck, uncovering a tiny white goat wrapped in a flannel coat. "I've got 4 more in the bed," she said. "They haven't eaten since yesterday." "We'll start building now," Eli said. "You've got a shot." By mid-morning, the homestead looked like a staging area for some rural revolution. Hay bales lined the drive. Snow had been packed down by the boots of 20 different families. Domes rose across the property, uneven and imperfect, but warm, alive. Jonas ran logistics. Noah Kittredge arrived with a notepad and started sketching dome dimensions. June brewed gallons of coffee on a camp stove outside, handing out cups like lifelines. Even Aunt Ray showed up again this time, with 2 young volunteers from her wildlife rehab program and a truckload of baling twine. She didn't say a word about Eli's ridiculous idea anymore. She just got to work. They built 12 domes that day. Some of them held goats, some held sheep. One built by a family from over the range was sized for twin calves and sealed with tarp from an old army tent. And still the trucks kept coming. Eli took breaks only to check the older domes. The original held steady at a temperature he could only describe as impossible. The goats inside napped and stirred with lazy contentment, entirely unaware they'd sparked something bigger than themselves. "They don't know their legends," he muttered to June. She smiled faintly. "That's probably why they're still alive." That afternoon, while helping a teenager named Micah secure the top layer of his dome, Eli heard the scoff before he saw the man behind it. "Cute," the voice said. He turned to see a new arrival, clean-shaven lips curled into something that didn't quite qualify as a smile. He stood apart from the group, arms folded across his chest. "You're the guy, huh?" the man asked. "The hay king of nowhere." Eli didn't reply. "I'm Bryce Langley," the man went on. "Came up from Sitka. Drove all night. I figured I'd find something smarter than goat huts made out of mulch." Micah bristled. "You got a better idea?" Bryce raised his hands. "Just saying. I've got heated stalls, solar panels, climate monitoring. You all look like a medieval science fair." Eli nodded toward the dome beside them. "Go touch the inside wall." Bryce hesitated, then stepped up to the dome, knelt, and placed his hand inside. He jerked it back. "No way," he whispered. "Believe it now," Micah said. Bryce looked at Eli, his voice quieter now. How Eli offered a simple shrug. "The body wants to live. I just built it a place to try." They worked until long after dark. Some domes glowed faintly from inside, thanks to small lanterns hung from improvised pegs. Some people sang while they worked. Others cried. One man stood for 20 minutes in front of his dome before he could walk away from it. Eli knew that look, the disbelief that something this simple could actually work. The fear that hope might hurt more than loss if proven false. But the numbers were starting to add up. Across 3 days, of all the goats brought to the domes in time, over 80% had stabilized. Some were eating again. A few even butted heads in play. The radio crackled with new messages, every hour requests for blueprints, supply lists, questions from people who had never heard of Eli Brennan until yesterday. That night, Eli stood at the porch, staring out at the field of domes now scattered across his land. They steamed in the moonlight like little breathing creatures. June came out beside him, wrapping her arm around his. "You've started something," she said. He didn't answer right away. Finally, he whispered, "I don't want to be the only one who knows how to do it." "You won't be," she said. By the fourth day, it wasn't just neighbors showing up. A film crew arrived mid-morning, bouncing up the snow-packed road in a rented SUV that looked like it had never seen a dirt driveway before. 2 reporters from Anchorage followed behind in a smaller car with out-of-state plates, and a woman with a clipboard and wind-burned cheeks asked for a comment on the dome phenomenon. Eli Brennan didn't know what to say. He didn't like cameras. He didn't like spotlights. He liked goats that breathed snow, that stayed outside the house, and hay that did what it was supposed to. But now the world was watching. The news van parked beside his shed. A man in a beanie stepped out and adjusted a tripod while his partner ran a mic check. A young woman with a pinched voice approached Eli and said, "Can we get a shot of you by one of the structures, maybe pointing at it for scale?" Eli just stared at her. Jonas leaned over and whispered, "You point at anything, and I'm never letting you forget it." He smiled, but it didn't last, because not long after the cameras started rolling, the questions got louder. Not from reporters, from inside the community. "He didn't invent hay," someone muttered near the dome line. "Sure they work, but it ain't rocket science," another said. Eli was walking back toward the house when he heard one more loud and clear, "Don't know why they're calling it the Brennan method, like he's some kind of goat whisperer." He turned. 3 men stood near a newly built dome, ranchers from the South Valley Arms, crossed, leaning on shovels. One of them, a man named Keller, wore a smug look Eli had seen on the faces of skeptics before. The kind that didn't want something to work if it hadn't come from them. "You need something?" Eli asked. Keller shrugged. "Just saying, not like you invented the idea of keeping animals warm. We've been doing it since before you had your first pair of boots." Eli nodded slowly. "That right, I've seen hay shelters before," Keller continued. "This ain't new. People just acting like it is because it came with a story." Jonas, hearing the exchange, stepped in. "And how many of your animals survived this storm, Keller?" The man's jaw tightened. "Some." "Some," Jonas repeated. "Eli's domes saved over 80% of what came through here. You can call it luck or instinct or dumb haystack magic, but mockery doesn't keep animals warm." Eli could see it then, the line being drawn. It wasn't just weather anymore. It was pride. Some couldn't handle that the answer came from a guy they used to laugh at. It was one thing to use the dome. It was another to admit why it worked. Later that day, Eli sat in the barn with June patching a tarp that had torn in the wind. She threaded a thick needle through canvas while he held it tight. "They're gonna come for the idea," she said quietly. "But not all of them will give you credit." He didn't look up. "Don't care about credit." "You say that," she said. "But I know you. You care about what's true." He sighed. "If I argue with them, I make it about me. That's not what this is." She paused. "So what is it?" Eli ran a hand over the patched tarp, his voice steady. "It's about the next guy. The one who loses 20 goats because he listened to the wrong expert. Or the rancher who's too proud to copy a design unless someone shows him how to build it without shame." She nodded. "Then you better start writing it down." That night, Eli wrote the first manual. He used a spiral notebook and a pencil worn flat from sharpening. He listed dimensions, stacking instructions, heat retention notes, and troubleshooting tips for weak bales and high winds. June typed it into her laptop. Jonas edited it. Aunt Ray sent it to every farming co-op contact she had. They called it the Straw Dome Guide. Nowhere on the title page did Eli put his name, but everyone who read it knew where it started. By the end of the week, the weather eased. Sunlight broke through thin clouds. Snow stopped falling. The wind dropped to a dull whisper. And on a Saturday morning, thick with silence, someone knocked on the door. It was Micah, the teenager, who'd built his own dome 3 days earlier. He looked taller somehow, eyes wide, cheeks pink from running. "My goats," he said breathlessly. "They're up, all of them." Eli followed him back to the dome. Inside, the kids were standing, bleating, nipping at his coat. One tried to climb a straw pile. "I didn't think they'd make it," Micah whispered. "I mean, I hoped, but I didn't believe it." "Not really." Eli smiled. "Now you do." Micah grinned. "I want to teach other kids how to build these. At school. Maybe even do it as a project." "Do it," Eli said. "Make it better." That evening, another email came through June's inbox. This one from a livestock journal out of Oregon. "We've heard of your dome solution. We'd like to feature your farm and your process in our March issue. Please confirm the name and background of the original builder." June looked at Eli, waiting. He sipped his coffee, then shook his head. "Tell them about the domes," he said. "Tell them how they work. But leave my name out of it." June raised an eyebrow. Still not interested in credit, Eli leaned back in his chair, looking out at the domes glowing under the moonlight. "I'm interested in them working. And if leaving my name out means less ego in the way, then so be it." The snow had stopped falling 3 days ago, but the cold was still deep in the bones of the land. Eli could feel it every time he stepped outside, less a sting now, and more a hum like the earth itself had gone quiet, conserving its last bit of warmth. But inside the domes, things were different. Alive. Buzzing. The goat kids had started playing again. Some kicked up straw and chased each other in clumsy, joyful bursts. They were regaining weight, regaining heat, regaining life. The domes were doing more than keeping animals alive, now they were bringing them back. That should have been enough. But then the school bus came rumbling up the drive. Eli blinked at it from the porch boots, still crusted with hay and snow. The bus door creaked open, and out stepped a woman in a long gray coat and mismatched gloves, her hair twisted up in a bun that had clearly fought the wind and lost. She looked around, nodded to herself, and walked toward him like she belonged there. "Mr. Brennan," she called out. He straightened. "Yeah." She offered a hand. "Carla Ames. I teach science at the middle school in Homer. We've met before at a feed co-op meeting, maybe 3 years back," maybe, Eli said, cautiously shaking her hand. "I've got 20 kids in my 8th grade class who've spent the last week watching your domes on every local news station, every radio segment, and every pixel of their TikTok feeds." She paused. "And they're asking questions I can't answer." Eli raised an eyebrow. "About goats," she said. "About insulation. About thermal regulation. About sustainable heating in low-resource environments. About whether a dome like that could keep people warm." He stared at her. "They want to build one," she added. "Not for animals. For people. As an emergency shelter." He let that sink in. "I taught them how to build domes," he said slowly, "but they're teaching me what to do next." Carla smiled. "Exactly." They spent the rest of the morning walking the perimeter. Carla took notes, snapped pictures of the straw seams, the vents near the top, the way the bales stacked against prevailing winds. She asked about condensation, about airflow, about what materials he'd change if he had access to more than hay and tarp. Eli answered the best he could. He wasn't a scientist, but the dome wasn't just luck anymore, it was pattern, repeatable. He'd seen it proven a dozen times now in 6 different versions with animals of all sizes. People. That was different. He didn't say no. He also didn't say yes. Not yet. That afternoon, Carla returned with a crate of materials from her classroom. Infrared thermometers, humidity sensors, even a small thermal camera. She set up a test beside the smallest dome on the property and ran a few experiments. Eli helped hold tools while she logged numbers. When she compared the internal readings to the outside temperature still hovering at 12 below, her eyes widened. "This is insane," she muttered. "Good insane." Your dome is maintaining a difference of over 40 degrees Fahrenheit, without electricity, gas, or fire. Eli folded his arms. "Guess hay's better than it looks." She turned the camera toward him. "You ever think about what this could mean in places that don't have heat in winter, for families without working stoves, for emergencies, power outages, storms, folks stuck in cars overnight?" He had thought about it. But not like this. Not with numbers. Not with the math staring him in the face. By nightfall, they'd drawn up the first sketch of a people-sized dome. Wider base. Reinforced entryway. Mylar blankets added to the interior. A modified floor built on pallets with insulation between. June joined them at the table and stared at the plans. "You're really doing this?" she asked. Carla answered before Eli could. "We're going to try. My students will build a prototype next week behind the school. I'm calling it the Warm Pod Project." Eli let out a slow breath. "If it works." June finished for him. It changes everything. The next few days blurred. Eli became more than a builder. He was a mentor, a tester, a quiet architect of something he hadn't meant to start, but couldn't walk away from. He took Carla's thermal camera and documented every dome, comparing age, structure, heat retention. He worked with Jonas and Noah to test alternate materials, wood chips, wool, even snow-packed walls between hay layers. Some held better. Some didn't. Every experiment was logged. Every failure was studied. And every success built momentum. Then the call came. A local nurse, Melanie, had heard about the human dome tests. She ran a small clinic up near Moose Pass and asked if Eli could help them build an outdoor waiting shelter, something warm, cheap, and fast for families stuck outside during COVID surges or weather lockdowns. He didn't hesitate. With Jonas's help, he loaded bales onto a trailer and drove up the mountain. By dusk, they'd built a 2-person dome beside the clinic. Melanie stepped inside, tested the heat with her own hand, and said, "You just saved my propane budget for the winter." It was spreading again. Not just animal rescue anymore. Not just rural farms. But hospitals. Schools. Maybe even cities. That night, Eli lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. His mind spun with versions of domes, mobile kits, emergency storm shelters, roadside warm stations for travelers. He imagined teachers building them with students, ranchers passing them down to their kids, volunteers stacking bales outside clinics in blizzards. And all of it had started with 6 shivering goats. The idea wasn't his anymore. It belonged to everyone. And that somehow made it even more his. The snow returned just as they finished stacking the 3rd dome outside the Sterling rest stop. Thick, wet flakes floated down like ashes, coating every surface in a silence so heavy it felt like holding your breath. Eli stood with his gloved hands on his hips, boots buried ankle-deep in slush, staring at the final bale in place. Warm air from inside curled out of the top vent in a soft, ghostly plume, mixing with the frigid air, like the dome itself was breathing. Beside him, Jonas brushed snow off his coat. That one's solid. Should hold for at least 2 weeks. Longer if nobody messes with it. Eli muttered more to himself than anyone else. They'd built 3 domes in 6 hours, one large enough for a family of 4, one for stranded drivers, and one modified to shelter a couple with an infant. All of it organized on the fly. No permits, no questions. Just hands and hay and urgency. Across the lot, June was showing 2 teenagers how to double knot baling twine. Carla Ames stood with a clipboard, hair soaked, tracking supply use and assigning build zones like she'd been doing it her whole life. The rest stop had turned into something between a disaster response hub and a haystack village, and still more people showed up. By nightfall, 25 individuals had found safety in domes that didn't exist that morning. One dome, still half-finished, was already heating up from nothing but body warmth, straw, and sheer, stubborn hope. Eli squinted through the snow at the cluster of domes. "If the cold comes for all of us," he said softly, "the warmth should too." Jonas turned his head. "You write that one down yet?" Eli shook his head. "I don't need to. It's already happening." They returned home late, the truck loaded with empty thermoses, used tarps, and torn gloves. June slept in the passenger seat, her cheek resting against the window boots, still covered in mud. Carla rode in the bed, curled beneath a blanket, clipboard still in her lap. The snow kept falling. By the time they reached the homestead, Eli could hardly see the outline of the barn, but the domes still glowed faintly through the white, like stars that had decided to settle on the ground. The next morning, as the kettle hissed and the radio clicked to life, a letter arrived. It was tucked into the mailbox under a layer of ice, sealed with a bright red zoning department stamp, and typed in the kind of bold font that didn't usually bring good news. June read it out loud while Eli fed the fire. "They want to discuss the legality of permanent unpermitted structures built on public land," she said. "Specifically, if they qualify as shelters requiring code adherence." Eli didn't say anything. He just stared into the flames. "They're talking fines," she added. "Possibly injunctions." "They're not permanent," he said after a pause. "That's the whole point." "Doesn't matter," June said. "They weren't built by the right people." 2 hours later, a local news broadcast aired a feature called Miracle Huts, or Safety Risk. A fire marshal warned about heat accumulation risks. A councilwoman mentioned hazardous materials. Another expert used the phrase potential for misuse. Not a single rancher or dome user was interviewed. Eli watched the whole segment in silence. When it ended, Jonas stood up and punched the wall. "Those kids at Sterling would be dead in their cars right now without those domes. They don't want the truth," Eli said. "They want control." June rubbed her temples. "We're getting too visible. Too fast." "No," Eli said. "We're not fast enough." That afternoon, Carla returned to the homestead. She came with another update. A tech startup out of Anchorage wanted to license the dome design. "Portable composite panels," she said. "Insulated, collapsible. Easy to ship, easy to brand." Eli raised a brow. "Easy to price up, too." "They want you to consult," she said. "Be the face of the product." "I don't want my face on anything," Eli said flatly. Carla hesitated. "If they commercialize it, more people could be helped." "Or fewer," he snapped. "You think a family stuck in a snowstorm with no gas and no signal is going to order a dome on back order? You think a rancher with $2 to his name is going to wait 3 weeks for a composite version when he's got hay right there?" "I'm just telling you what they're saying," she replied gently. "I know what they're saying, and I've seen what happens when people try to package survival like a product." He turned toward the window. The domes outside breathed steam into the wind, still and bright. "You can't trademark warmth," he whispered. "Not if you actually want it to spread." That night, Eli stayed up late sketching. He added new notes to the guide: how to modify domes for elderly people, where to store spare blankets, which tarp brands held best in freezing rain. He made handwritten diagrams with arrows and added instructions on what not to do. June scanned them into Carla's laptop. Micah formatted the PDFs into slideshows. Jonas read through every page like he was prepping for a test. And then they posted it. The Warmth Project, a full digital library. Free, open source, translatable. Within a week, the download count passed 40,000, then 80,000, then 100,000. Photos poured in from around the world. A single mother in Montana standing beside her goat dome, holding her child in one arm, a handwritten thank you sign in the other. A group of aid workers in Moldova using straw domes to protect displaced families during a power outage. A farmer in Alberta who wrote, "This saved my herd, my livelihood, maybe my life." Eli read every message. He tried to respond to as many as he could. But mostly, he just kept building. Because the warmth wasn't just saving animals anymore. It was saving people. And it wasn't his. It belonged to whoever needed it next. Eli was halfway through hauling another load of bales when the email came. He didn't see it until much later, after the light had faded from the Alaskan sky, and the cold had returned with that sharp, unforgiving bite that always followed a clear sunset. June read it aloud, at the table holding her phone like it was ticking. "Dear Mr. Brennan, after thorough review of your recent public shelter designs and their growing application, we at Cold Core Industries would like to formally propose an exclusive licensing partnership for the Brennan Dome. We believe your design in collaboration with our proprietary insulation materials could become a scalable global solution for climate resiliency." Eli wiped his hands on a towel. The Brennan Dome. June looked up. "Yeah, that's what they're calling it." He poured black coffee into his chipped mug and stared at the steam curling from the surface. "It was never mine to name," he muttered. Jonas, sitting at the far end of the table, pulled the laptop closer and scrolled through the rest of the email. "They're offering a starting bonus of $150,000 for the design rights and your story as the face of the brand, plus royalties." June raised her eyebrows. "That's more than what your dad made in 5 years ranching." "I know," Eli said quietly. Carla, who'd just come in from the cold, set her gloves down. "They're not the only ones. I've heard from 2 university labs, a nonprofit in Oregon, even FEMA. Everyone wants to jump in now that the domes work." "Of course they do," Eli said. "Now that it's safe, now that it's valuable." June's voice was soft. "What if they're not trying to steal it, Eli? What if they want to help scale it? Really scale it?" He didn't answer. Not right away. Because part of him wanted to believe that. Wanted to imagine his dome in a desert refugee camp or hurricane zone. He wanted to think about the mother in Nebraska who wouldn't have to bury her livestock again, or the ice fisherman in Finland using his notes to stay alive through another polar night. But another part of him knew what came next when the money showed up. Design patents, legal filings, cease and desist letters, barriers. That wasn't what the dome was. The dome was hay and breath and stubborn heat. It was a kid in Homer learning to build his first structure, a teacher in Moldova, a farmer in Alberta. It was free because it needed to be. "You can't trademark warmth," Eli said, finally breaking the silence. Jonas let out a small laugh. "That sounds like something we should paint on a billboard." Eli shook his head. "It's not a slogan, it's the point. By the next morning, the story had spread. A business blog had leaked Cold Core's offer. The headline read, "Alaska Farmer Turns Blizzard Shelter into $1 million Design." Calls flooded in, some reporters, some praise, a few threats. The worst ones weren't angry, they were congratulating him for finally cashing in. He hadn't accepted a cent. And yet just like that, the story wasn't his anymore. At lunch, Micah showed up with a worried look on his face. Some of the other kids at school saw the article, he said. Now they think we were just helping you get rich. You weren't, Eli said plainly. I know, Micah replied, but that's not what it looks like. Eli knelt beside him. Look at me. Micah did. You built something that kept people alive, Eli said. That matters more than what people say. The boy nodded, but Eli could tell it wasn't enough. The world was getting louder, messier, and the line between message and noise was blurring fast. That night he couldn't sleep. He stood outside the first dome he'd built, the original one Vernon had slept in during the worst of the storm. The bale walls were worn now, sagging slightly under the weight of time and weather, but it still stood. He knelt and pressed a hand to the straw. It was warm. Alive. The next morning, Eli made his decision. He invited everyone, Carla, June, Jonas, Aunt Ray, even the mayor of Homer, into the barn, where the whiteboard from last winter still leaned against the wall. He cleared the surface with one swipe of his arm and wrote in bold letters, "The warmth belongs to everyone." Here's what we do, he said. We publish the full design under Creative Commons, open source, free to copy, adapt, share, even sell, as long as nobody restricts others from doing the same. Carla blinked. That means no exclusive deals. Exactly, Eli said. Anyone who wants to use the dome has to keep it free for everyone else to use too. That's the price. Jonas grinned. That's not a price. That's a revolution. They spent the next 2 days updating the guide, adding disclaimers, legal language, simplified plans for low literacy regions. June reached out to a network of translators. Within 48 hours, the guide existed in 10 languages, hosted on a decentralized server system built by a volunteer IT team in Oregon. The Cold Core lawyers sent a terse message requesting clarity on the exclusivity of negotiations. Eli replied with one sentence. You can't trademark warmth. He never heard from them again. Weeks passed. The weather warmed slightly. The snow began to melt, revealing the shape of everything left behind, the bones of broken fences, the outlines of tires, the tracks where desperate boots had carried goats to warmth and hope. But something else was growing now. The domes weren't just survival anymore. They were stories, markers of resilience, acts of community. People sent photos of domes used for school lessons, makeshift clinics, even pop-up libraries. One town used a dome to shelter a local musician during a festival when his RV broke down. He performed inside it, string lights glowing against the straw walls, warmth pulsing with each chord. The warmth had evolved, not because of a company, because of people. Because someone had chosen to give it away instead of selling it. Eli sat on the porch one evening, notebook open in his lap, scribbling additions to the next version. June came out and handed him a coffee. You really think people won't screw it up? She asked. He smiled faintly. They will. Some will sell it. Some will claim it. Some will ruin it. She waited. But more of them will use it, he said, to save a life, to teach a kid, to do something good. She leaned her head on his shoulder. And that's enough. It has to be, he said. The wind returned before the warnings did. It came low and cruel, slithering across the treetops and rattling every loose shutter on the homestead. Eli felt it before he heard it, the way an old bone aches before a storm. He stood in the barn doorway, the goats huddled behind him, and watched the horizon darken into a smear of steel-gray clouds. It wasn't just another storm. Not this one. By noon, the forecast confirmed it. Arctic squall. Wind chills projected at 50 below. Gusts strong enough to topple vehicles. Duration unknown. A perfect storm, the kind that turned routine winter into emergency. Carla's voice trembled as she read the alert. They're calling it Black Ember. Eli stared out across the field, where the last of the domes sat quietly under a blanket of early snow. How long until it hits? They say 12 hours, she said. Could be less. The room shifted. Energy changed. Conversations sharpened. Jonas grabbed a clipboard. June fired off texts to every rancher in the region. Ray got on the radio. There wasn't time to panic, only time to build. The town of Homer mobilized like it had muscle memory. People knew what to do now. Hay bales rolled out from barns, tarps, unboxed twine distributed like firewood. Kids skipped school to help. Retired carpenters and electricians showed up with tool belts. Local businesses opened their storage for free. They didn't wait for the government. They were the response. Eli, standing in the town square beside the library, helped assemble a 3-ring dome structure to house families whose heating had failed. He didn't give speeches. He didn't direct traffic. He just worked. Because this was never about recognition. This was never just a dome, he muttered as he tied off the last corner tarp. It's a promise. Micah, stacking straw nearby, looked up. A promise, Eli nodded. That if the cold comes for you, somebody will make sure you're not alone. The boy looked thoughtful, then tied faster. By dusk, the town square had transformed. 5 domes stood ready, each with a name written in marker across the entryway: Hope Emberlight Rays Rest Shelter 5, and the original hearth. Inside hearth, a baby slept in her mother's arms, wrapped in 2 wool blankets, and the quiet heat of compressed hay. An elderly couple shared thermoses of coffee, smiling like they'd never expected to be warm again. All around them, more domes rose. Behind the clinic, in school parking lots, at gas stations. Jonas ran cables to add small solar lamps to each one, illuminating the snow-drenched town with soft yellow light that didn't feel like electricity. It felt like care. The dome network wasn't an idea anymore. It was infrastructure. Later that night, Carla found Eli standing alone by the dome they'd built for livestock overflow, staring out across the storm-slick highway. They say the wind's moving faster than they thought, she said. How fast? She hesitated. We might have 4 hours. Maybe 3. He exhaled long and low. That's not enough. No, she agreed. But it's what we have. He looked at her eyes, tired but clear. If I die in this thing, Carla, don't let them sell it. Not ever. She blinked. You're not gonna die. I mean it. I know, she said. And I promise. They stood in silence a moment longer, then turned back toward the barn where more hands waited. The wind hit like a wall. At 2:14 a.m., the first dome collapsed. One of the smaller test units near the lake bed, built by volunteers who hadn't reinforced the base. Eli was already there when the message came over the CB radio. He climbed into the wreckage with Jonas and pulled 2 shivering teens out from under a torn tarp. They were okay. Scared, but okay. They built a new one beside it in 42 minutes flat. Word spread. Teams reinforced everything. Snow piled up 3 feet in hours, but the domes held, all except one. Hearth. At 4:27 a.m., the tarp came loose. Wind surged inside. Blankets lifted. Screaming. Disorientation. Eli was inside within minutes. He crawled on all fours through the straw, cutting through wind and noise, and found the baby first. She was wrapped tight, unharmed. He passed her to June through the entrance, then doubled back for the others. The elderly couple was struggling to stand. He braced them both, pulled tarp down, rewrapped the seams by hand. His gloves shredded in the process, fingers bloody and raw, but the dome held. They made it out, and Hearth survived. Barely. When dawn broke, the snow was still falling, but the worst had passed. Wind slowed. Silence returned. The domes steamed again, not with urgency, but with the quiet exhale of survival. Eli walked through town like a ghost, checking every dome. Every one of them was occupied. Every one of them still warm. No one had frozen. Not one. The mayor called it a miracle. The news called it the night the domes held. But Eli didn't feel like a hero. He sat on the back steps of the barn, hands bandaged, face cut from windburn, and watched the first sunlight strike a dome roof and sparkle like glass. It didn't feel like a structure. It felt like a heartbeat. Jonas sat beside him. So, what now? Eli looked at him. Now we teach more people to build. And after that, he smiled slow and quiet. We figure out what else a dome can be. Later that day, Carla handed him a new letter. This one was from an international aid group. They weren't offering money. They were asking for help. Would Eli and his team come train communities in northern Canada, where extreme weather was stranding whole villages? She watched him read it, then asked, "What do you think?" "I think," Eli said, standing with his weight still heavy on one side, "that it's time to take warmth further." He looked out at the field of domes now steaming under the sun, like little sunlit lungs. They're not done saving people yet. They touched down in a remote stretch of northern Saskatchewan, just as the last of the daylight slipped behind the horizon, washing the tundra in a heavy blue haze. The air hit Eli's lungs like dry ice, sharp, biting, elemental. It reminded him of home. Not the way Alaska looked, but the way it felt, quiet, vast, and waiting. 2 aid workers met them on the tarmac, faces wrapped in scarves, eyes wind-burned but focused. No handshakes, just nods and urgency. The village was 8 kilometers inland. No passable roads. Snowmobiles only. Eli climbed onto the back of the first one, with his duffel strapped to his chest, the guidebook tucked inside like something sacred. Behind him, Carla rode with a crate of tools. Jonas and June had stayed behind in Homer to coordinate supply shipments. They were needed just as much back there. But Micah had come now 17 and taller than Eli by an inch, with a camera slung over one shoulder and hope blooming behind his frost-rimmed lashes. They didn't talk much on the ride. The engine noise swallowed conversation. But Eli didn't need words. He was here to build. And he knew by now that the dome would speak for itself. The village had been without power for 3 days. A downed transformer. Sub-zero temperatures. Frozen pipes. 600 people, nearly half of them children, sleeping in school gyms and dark basements. The only heat came from a backup generator meant to run for 12 hours. It was on hour 39. The mayor, a woman named Leona, met them at the community center. Her face was tired but held together with something harder than sleep. "We heard about what you built in Alaska," she said. "People say you turned hay into houses." Eli cracked a smile. "Not houses, just heat." She led them to the open field behind the elementary school. "You show us how to build it. We'll build all night." So they did. By the time the moon climbed over the treetops, the first dome was already standing. The villagers took to it quickly, with a kind of reverent speed. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe something else. Eli wasn't sure. But he saw in them what he'd seen 100 times before: hands moving faster than instruction learning, by doing absorbing heat and knowledge in equal measure. Micah recorded everything: time-lapse footage of straw walls rising against the dark steam curling from the first finished dome as people stepped inside for the first time and didn't want to leave. Eli didn't speak much that night. He patched seams. He tightened rope. He rested one hand against each wall to check for leaks. The hay scratched his skin through his gloves. The cold pressed against his ribs, but it didn't matter. He wasn't building domes anymore. He was building resistance. By sunrise, there were 7 domes on the field. 1 for elders, 1 for children under 5, 1 for people with disabilities, 1 used as a triage center just warm enough to keep IVs from freezing. Inside the largest one, Leona stood beside a small girl in a pink jacket and whispered, "It smells like safety." Eli didn't cry. Not then. But something in him loosened, broke open. Because this was what it had always been about. Not hay, not temperature, not design, but dignity. Over the next month, Eli and his team traveled to 5 more communities. Remote reserves, isolated towns, a refugee camp near the border where a local carpenter had already printed the guide and built his own dome before they arrived. They didn't teach anymore. They shared. They sat in circles, drew in the dirt, modified the design for taro leaves, for mud bricks, for bamboo and sandbags. Every culture added its own logic, its own voice, and the dome changed, but the warmth never did. In March, Eli flew back to Homer. The ice was thinning by then. The goats were birthing again. Life resumed. But something in him had shifted. Not in size, but in shape. Like the edges of his life had expanded, made room for others. He walked the perimeter of the homestead on the first night back. The original dome, the one Vernon had almost died in, was now collapsed, sunken into the ground like a buried heartbeat. Eli knelt beside it and pressed a hand into the straw. It was still warm, even after all this time. Micah released the documentary 2 weeks later. The Warmth Project: How We Built Something That Couldn't Be Owned. It was raw, beautiful. Eli's cracked hands, June's weathered face, Jonas shouting over wind, a girl in Saskatchewan reading from the guide in a whisper, babies sleeping in dome corners, firelight reflected in tarp seams, 1,000 versions of the same act, someone choosing not to let the cold win. It went viral, but not in the loud, empty way of trends, in the quiet way that lingers. School curriculums picked it up. Aid groups began hosting dome build days. The guide was translated into 34 languages. Communities shared updates in a global thread of warmth. They called it a movement. But Eli didn't. To him, it was just what people did when they remembered they belonged to each other. One afternoon, a man in a suit knocked on the door. Eli answered with hay on his shirt. The man smiled politely and held out a folder. "We're from a new nonprofit coalition, backed by several major climate response funds. We want to build dome hubs across the country, but we'd like you to lead it." Eli took the folder. Didn't open it. "Let me guess," he said. "No selling. No ownership. Just building." The man smiled wider. "Exactly." Eli nodded. "Then you're not hiring me. You're joining us." They shook hands. Just like that, it kept going. Years passed. The domes kept rising. Not just in snow, but in droughts, in floods, in war zones, in silence. Anywhere people were cold, afraid, forgotten, they rose. Each one not just shelter, but signal, a message you are not alone. Eli aged. His hands grew slower, his eyes more distant. But he never stopped showing up. One day, he sat in front of a crowd of kids at a school in Fairbanks. They were building their first dome in the yard. A little girl asked, "Did you invent it?" He smiled. "No," he said. "I just remembered something the world already knew. That warmth isn't something you keep. It's something you give." The class clapped. Later that day, he stood watching them stack straw with small hands and big dreams. And for the first time, he allowed himself a truth he'd never spoken aloud. It was never about survival. It was about belonging. The warmth was never meant to stay here. It was meant to spread. And it did.